Hold on. There we are.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Mentionables. It's been a long time, but we're trying to keep our podcast presence felt. So we decided to tackle a relevant subject, something we rarely do here. But since it's a big win for Clinton and his campaign, I'm going to be letting him talk about it, and we'll discuss it. We are back. We have Nick Peters back with us, which is a rarity.
Mhm.
Thanks for showing up, Nick, and blessing us with
Uh-huh.
your presence. Before we get into the meat of the show, let's bring back an old favorite, of mine. I have no idea if anybody else enjoys this at all, but we're going to be playing some love song, worship song. The rules of the game are I read the lyrics from a song, and then you have to decide whether you're listening to a love song from pop radio or a worship song from the church. Ready, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think I've got a perfect record on this, actually.
I actually don't remember. We'll go with that, though. You exploit my lack of memory, and we'll assume that you've got a perfect record.
There we go.
Okay, so the first song lyrics: "You are so beautiful to me. You are so beautiful to me. Can't you see? You're everything I hope for. You're everything I need. You are so beautiful to me." All right, those are the lyrics. Love song or worship song?
Clinton, I know this
well,
one, so I'll let you go first.
I know this one too. This is obviously
Yeah,
Okay.
the love
anyone
song.
who's seen the movie Evolution knows this one. This is a love song.
It is. It is. Although I could easily see this being sung in church. At least that portion. It's Joe Cocker's "You
Yeah.
Are So Beautiful."
Mhm.
All right.
All right. Well, that one was a bust. Let's try another one. Second song lyrics: "I will follow him wherever he may go, and near him I will always be, for nothing can keep me away. He is my destiny. I will follow him. Ever since he touched my heart, I knew there isn't an ocean too deep, a mountain so high it can keep me away from his love. I love him. I love him. I love him. And where he goes, I'll follow. I'll follow. I'll follow."
Yeah, I know
You'll
this
always
one
be my
also. Do
true
you know it
love,
too,
my true
Clinton?
love, my true love. Yeah, I do. Yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, this was even sung in Sister Act. It's a worship song. A love song, love song.
Yeah, no, I was
Yeah.
going to say this is a trick. This is a trick one because it's a love song, but they sing it in Sister Act, where Whoopi Goldberg was playing a nun who,
Yeah.
she was playing a lounge singer who basically had to
But
go into
she
witness
was,
protection,
yeah.
and so she went into witness protection at a convent, and so she was masquerading as a nun, and she took over the choir there, and they started incorporating the songs she was familiar with into their choral repertoire, and "I Will Follow Him" was one of them. Another one was "Ball of Confusion" by the Temptations.
Oh, that was my
And they
next one.
also
So
did
yeah.
they also did
Oh, was
My
it?
Guy and turned it
Oh,
to
No.
My God. But
Oh,
it was honestly
right. Yeah.
changed the words a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that was "I'll Follow Him" by Peggy Marsh. And how many do I have? I have two more. Hopefully, I'll get one of these that you don't know.
One that we don't recognize. Actually, you're probably because I don't listen to a whole lot of like modern worship, just because so much of it is trite and it all sounds the same. Now you'll
Exactly.
probably stump me more on the worship songs than on the love songs, to be honest.
All right, so here's your third lyric. "You are the sea of love where all my pleasures roll, the circle where my passions move, and center of my soul. To you my spirit flies with infinite desire, and yet how far from you I lie. Please raise me higher." Okay, that's it.
I think that's probably a worship song.
Yeah, I do not recognize this song. That being said, I don't listen to a lot of modern pop either because a lot of it is so terrible. It's not just Christian music. Um, Yeah, so I'm going to guess that that's a worship song.
Okay. Well, you're both right. I don't know the name of the song or
Uh,
who sings it, but it is, in fact, a worship song. All right. Well,
okay.
final one. I'm batting 0 on these. Okay. The lyrics. Sometimes I wonder how I'd ever make it through this world without having you. I just wouldn't have a clue. Because sometimes it seems like this world's closing in on me and there's no way of breaking free. And then I see you reach for me. Sometimes I want to give up. I want to give in. I want to quit the fight. And then I see you and everything's all right. Everything's all right. When I see you smile, I can face the world. Oh, you know, I can do anything. When I see you smile, I see a ray of light. Oh, I see it shining right through the rain when I see you smile.
I'm pretty
Okay.
sure that is a love song. I don't know which one it is, but I'm pretty sure it's a love song.
What do you think, Clinton?
It sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't place it. Okay. Yeah, part of me wants to go love song because the part's about when I see you smile. There aren't a whole lot of Christian worship songs I'm aware of that are that literal
Mhm.
with anthropomorphizing God and giving him human qualities.
Sure.
But part of me also says, well, it kind of does sound like a worship song. I'm gonna go with Nick's intuition here. I'm gonna say love song.
Okay, that was When I See You Smile by Bad English. So, yes, it was
Oh,
a
okay,
love
that would be a
song.
love song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's
Yeah.
the end of Love Song, Worship Song. Perfect game for both of you. Good job.
Cool. Cool.
Bad
Thank
selection
you.
on my part, it turns out. But Clinton, we are going to be discussing a very live issue in the media now, and something
Mhm.
that you've been working towards your entire apologetics ministry, if I understand correctly.
He's been working to supply baby
Pretty much.
formula.
All right,
No, not
Clinton, I'm
quite.
turning the
That's not
discussion
my
over to
purview.
you.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just give a quick background of what's been going on. It happened. The news broke mid last week, I think, where essentially, well, I guess I'll start a little bit back because there was a court case that went before the Supreme Court, and I'm not too familiar with it. It's I think it's called Dobbs v. Planned Parenthood or something like that, where it was a pro-life law in Tennessee or some state. Sorry, I probably should have probably should have looked that up before, but it just occurred to me right now that I should probably at least reference that court case because that's one that took it before the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court could reanalyze these court cases. But anyway, this court case outlawed abortion after like 15 weeks, I think, and so according to Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Well, essentially, according to Roe v. Wade, states cannot outlaw or restrict abortion past the point of viability. And viability to the medical community is somewhere around 22 to 24 weeks. So restricting abortion after 14 or 15 weeks, when this law was I have to bring my hands in wherever there we are, unconstitutional because these court
For our
cases
podcast
basically said
listeners,
that you
that
can't
was in
restrict.
scare quotes.
Right, exactly. Said that you can't restrict abortion before viability. You can after viability because the state has a vested interest in protecting fetal life at that point. But then the sister case, Doe v. Bolton, essentially said that, well, a woman can get abortion for any health reason and then defined health so broadly that, as Scott Klusendorf says, you can drive a Mack truck through it. So essentially, courts cannot or states cannot restrict abortion at all because even if they do restrict it after viability, they have to have that health clause in there so that if as long as a woman can find a doctor willing to perform an abortion and willing to say that it's for her health reasons, whether it be for physical health, financial health, family health, any kind of health she can make it about, then the abortion clinic has to give her an abortion. So there were uh, no real obstacles to getting an abortion at any point in pregnancy. The only obstacle would be would she be able to find an abortionist willing to perform that procedure, because not every abortionist will perform late term abortions. Some will only do it up to the second trimester or something. But anyway, so this court case, this Dobbs court case, went before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, now that they have a majority conservative leaning on the court, because under President Trump's tutelage, we lost 3 Supreme Court justices for various reasons. I'm really bad with names. I'm trying to think of the justice. There's like a really conservative justice.
Ginsburg and Kennedy.
Oh, Scalia. Yeah, Scalia. Justice Scalia, who was the most conservative Supreme Court justice on the Supreme Court, next to Clarence Thomas and Alito, passed away, and so President Trump actually got to nominate his replacement. And then you had Kennedy, who retired, and then you had who was the other one? Ginsburg, who also passed away. Right, who also passed away. And so President Trump essentially got to replace 3 Supreme Court justices. And he replaced them with very conservative Supreme Court justices. And because we had that
which
conservative
is unusual
majority,
for a one-term president.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's practically unheard of, I think. So yeah, I would imagine President Trump probably holds the record for nominating and confirming the most amount of Supreme Court justices, I would imagine, because I don't think any president's done 3 before. But considering now that we have this conservative majority, they're more reasonable about abortion, and now they're looking at these court cases objectively. And I can say objectively, and some of our more liberal listeners will obviously think that I'm just being biased, but you can actually find statistics which show that the liberal Supreme Court justices practically always vote in lockstep, much, much more than the conservative justices do. The conservative justices are much more likely to vote based on what the law says rather than what their personal beliefs are, whereas the liberal justices are much more likely to vote based on personal convictions, personal beliefs. So I can say they're more willing to look at this objectively just based on the statistics that we've seen about how the conservative versus the liberal justices tend to lean. But yeah, so this court case goes before the Supreme Court. They reevaluate Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which are the landmark abortion cases in the United States. Roe v. Wade, of course, was the landmark case that legalized abortion in the United States, and then Planned Parenthood v. Casey in 1993 basically reevaluated Roe v. Wade and then affirmed Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was poorly argued, poorly reasoned, but Planned Parenthood v. Casey was even worse. If you really look at the reasoning that the court used, you have to kind of wonder how these supposedly intelligent justices were able to defend these court cases with such poor reasoning, not just logically and philosophically, but also through poor jurisprudence as well. For example, Justice Blackmun, who wrote the majority opinion in Roe v. Wade, was relying on primarily on the history of one Cyril Means Jr., who basically wrote a revisionist history that bore little resemblance to the actual history of abortion. So it was just really, really bad all around. So the Supreme Court basically reevaluated Roe, reevaluated Casey, and said, look, from where we're standing, these have no standing legally, they have no standing philosophically. We cannot find in the Constitution anything about abortion. And so these Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood v. Casey were unconstitutionally decided because there's nothing in the Constitution. Justice Blackmun and the other majority Supreme Court justices who ruled on Roe v. Wade grounded a right to abortion and a right to privacy. They say that in the Constitution we can find a right to privacy. Abortion is a private medical decision. There was a previous case about contraception in which they ruled that married couples can in fact use contraception without facing any legal problems, because it used to be the case that married couples could not use contraception, but there's a court case that essentially said, where they ruled that these are very personal, very private decisions between a married couple, so they have the right to use contraception if they so choose. And so that was one of the court cases that was cited in Roe, just to show that these are really very personal decisions. And so since we have a right to privacy, which we can find in the Constitution, abortion is also a very personal, very private medical decision between a woman and her doctor. And so we have no right to step in and say that she can't have an abortion. So they grounded a right to abortion and a right to privacy, which of course is terrible reasoning, because you can't justify harming or killing someone, by arguing that we have a right to privacy. You can't justify spousal abuse because of that. You can't justify child abuse because of that. Abusing a toddler. So it was a really, really poorly reasoned that you can ground a right to abortion in a right to privacy as well. So there's no constitutional case to be made for abortion. So when the Supreme Court ruled in Roe v. Wade, they ruled unconstitutionally because it's not in the Constitution. But the Supreme Court also overstepped their bounds, because the Supreme Court is the judicial branch of the United States government, meaning they interpret laws, they don't make laws. But Roe v. Wade essentially said that no state is able to restrict abortion up to the point of viability. So they were essentially making laws. So the Supreme Court was overstepping their bound as the judicial branch of the United States government also. So their intention then is to overturn these landmark cases, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, and return the question of abortion to the states. And that's the leak decision in a nutshell. Just let me just add real quick that I have not had a chance to actually read that majority decision in full, which I believe was written by Justice Alito. I've heard some things about it, what the reasoning was, that kind of thing. But I've started my blog back up, which you can find at prolifephilosophy.com. And I've already written one article about this. And then as soon as I read the decision in full, I'm going to summarize the arguments made in that blog. So if you want to know what the actual decisions are, because I've had a lot of interactions on abortion since it happened. 99.5% of the people I've interacted with have not read the decision, have no idea what was being argued. They're just relying on, pro-abortion talking points and really bad arguments, that kind of thing. If you really want to know what it says, go check out my blog. Make sure you follow it, and just, because I intend to post, summarize the arguments as soon as I get a chance to read that. So go ahead, Joel.
Well, I figured out the answer to my question as you were talking. I was going to ask about the wording in Roe v. Wade up to the point of viability, and how it has been argued that abortion should be legal up to and perhaps beyond the exit of the fetus from the mother.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me that you can just add state laws on top of the, Roe v. Wade says you can't outlaw it up to that point.
Right. So even though you can't outlaw it before viability, there's no law saying that you cannot have it legal past that point. So some states like California have it legal all the way up until the point of birth. But again, like I said, even if a state has it illegal past viability, the health clause in Doe v. Bolton essentially says if the woman can make it, can convince the abortionist that it's necessary for her health, then she can have an abortion, even though the state says that abortions can't be performed. So in essence, there's no real obstacle to a woman having a late-term abortion. The only real obstacle is if she's able to find an abortionist willing to perform the abortion that late in the pregnancy. And there are some, in Colorado, in fact, there's one, I believe he's in Boulder. Warren Hearn, I think, is the abortionist in Colorado who does late-term abortions, and there are others, throughout the United States. But yeah, so essentially, there's nothing saying that a state could not have abortion legal after that point. And so the justification that the Supreme Court gave for this in Roe is that a woman has the right to decide for herself when life begins. So some women think it begins at conception, others think it begins at birth. Then they have this really ridiculous statement about how, since scientists, philosophers, and theologians can't agree on when life begins, neither is the Supreme Court going to rule on when life begins, which of course they did, because if life begins at conception, then you can't just rule that we can kill them. So by allowing these children to be killed, the Supreme Court was making a determination and a ruling about when life begins. But there's no principled reason why a woman shouldn't be able to kill her 5-year-old or 10-year-old child under that reasoning, because what if she doesn't think life begins until you're 18 and out of the house? Well, you know there's no principled reason why she couldn't, based on the reasoning in Roe. But also, uh, you know, the teaching of creationism is not allowed in public schools. And the Supreme Court would not allow the reasoning of, well, because scientists, theologians, and philosophers can't agree on how old the Earth is, we're not going to rule on what can or cannot be taught in schools. Well, that's not reasoning that the Supreme Court would accept. But for some reason, when it comes to when human life begins, that's exactly the kind of reasoning they used. But again, like I said, this is really poorly argued, because when human life begins has been known since the mid 1800s. So the justices on the Supreme Court knew very well when human life begins. It begins at fertilization, which has been scientifically shown. Because there were people who had a different opinion, doesn't mean that they were in any way obligated to respect that differing opinion, since those different opinions go against what the science has shown for over 100 years by that point. So, Roe v. Wade was just a devastating ruling by activist judges, which had no basis in the Constitution, no basis in science, no basis in philosophy or theology either. It was just poorly argued all around. And it was so poorly argued that even at the time, pro-choice thinkers derided it. Even pro-choice thinkers knew that it was shoddily argued, and that grounding it in privacy was a poor way to justify abortion.
And if I could play devil's advocate here a little bit, though, but don't you know that when Trump's justices were nominated for Supreme Court and they were undergoing the confirmation promise, they all swore that Roe v. Wade was the law of the land and they would not overturn it. So surely we should be having impeachment talks right now, right?
Oh, yeah, this is a common refrain that I've been hearing. I watch a YouTube channel called Walk Don't Run. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it for pro-choice people to go watch. They would learn something, but the host of it is actually really. Right, Don't Walk, Run. He's real snarky and can sometimes be kind of a jerk. So I don't know if I'd recommend it to people who disagree with me. But he really researches everything he talks about. So at the very least, you may disagree with them, but he at least has reasons for saying what he says. And this is something he actually tackled. He actually did like a 10-minute video on this kind of thing. And yeah, none of the conservative justices, they go as far back as Alito and Thomas's confirmation hearings. They say that these justices said they're the law of the land that cannot be overturned, which is completely false. They're lying about what the justices said, even Alito and Thomas. But more recently, when you had the confirmations of Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch, who all, none of them said it's the law of the land. None of them said it cannot be reevaluated or overturned. What they said was Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey are important precedent. Which is true. They're landmark cases and they're precedent, because when it comes to evaluating whether or not abortion is legally permissible, these are cases that they point to show that yes, abortion is legally allowed in the United States because of these cases. So these are a precedent, but they're not the law of the land, and they cannot be reevaluated or overturned. In fact, if there's a bad ruling on the books, then it's the obligation of the Supreme Court to reevaluate and overturn these things. So yeah, they couldn't just come right out and say it, because only pro-choice judges can actually come out and say say what their position is on abortion and get nominated to the Supreme Court. Pro-life justices can't. So they have to be strategic about what they say in order to get confirmed onto the Supreme Court. So they couldn't just but also, if you really go back and watch the confirmation hearings, you can just tell that none of them are really even going in with an agenda that they want to just overturn Roe v. Wade. What they're basically saying is, I cannot in good conscience as a judge predetermine how I'm going to rule on these cases. So I can't tell you that I'd overturn Roe v. Wade, because it's up to whatever arguments are presented during the trial, which would determine how I would rule. So I cannot in good conscience tell you how I would rule on any given case. That would just be unethical as a judge. And that was essentially the stance that each of the justices took. And I'm sure they practiced that over and over again, because they knew they were going to be asked about their thoughts on Roe v. Wade and whether or not they'd overturn it. So, yeah.
it's one point out that I think Andrew who does that show Don't Walk Alone also said that Plessy was a court case that had a whole lot more precedent than Roe v. Wade did, lasted a whole lot longer,
Right.
and it was overturned. And I think most liberals and leftists are happy that one was overturned.
Right. Yeah. So just arguing that this is the law of the land is just a, just a shoddy argument to shut down debate. But there's a concept in justice, and this is why they reaffirmed it in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, is because there's a concept called stare decisis, which uh, I'm learning Latin right now, but I'm not 100% sure what that actually means in English. I haven't really gotten that far yet in my Latin studies, but it essentially it's essentially that the legal doctrine that um, that precedent is key, and so since in their minds it would cast doubt on the Supreme Court if they were constantly overturning their prior decisions. Stare decisis says we're going to keep these as precedent, uh, essentially, and I think it's a really bad doctrine personally, because it seems to me that someone comes off as more believable if they're able to reevaluate prior decisions and then overrule themselves if they find themselves to have been in error. So saying that court cases because of stare decisis cannot be reevaluated or overturned because people would lose confidence in the Supreme Court, I think is just really poor reasoning. Because it seems like digging your heels in when you have an obviously bad decision on the books and saying we're going to keep it here because we don't want people to lose faith in the Supreme Court. I think that causes people, myself included, especially, that causes people to lose even more faith in the Supreme Court, because judges start looking more and more like activists who are willing to keep bad laws on the books, just because that it could be unpopular to overturn them, or because they want those laws on the books, even though they were poorly argued, poorly reasoned, that kind of thing.
So one of the things that I'm hearing a lot of sky is falling talk from the left, and I think I'm hearing a little overly optimistic talk from the right. So I don't think that um, that Roe v. Wade is what most people is the animal that most people think it is. Um, on the right, it seems like there's this general impression that, hey, abortion is gone. The ding dong, the witch is dead. It's no longer among us. And on the left, it seems like they have a generally similar concept that, oh no, they're going to start imprisoning women, and um, it's the sky is falling. I mean, first of all, let's address the legal aspect of that. Overturning Roe v. Wade, did that just make abortion illegal across the country?
No.
It returned the decision to the states. So some states will outlaw abortion completely. Some states, like California and New York, will have abortion permissible through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason, because they're the most liberal states in the union. And then many states are going to be right in the middle, where they're going to say we're not going to outlaw it completely. We're not going to have it legal through all 9 months, but we're going to have it legal up to a certain point. We'll have it legal up to, say, the end of the first trimester or the end of the second trimester, because by then a woman should know she's pregnant and should be able to make that decision by that point. Or there's certain circumstances which might arise, not just her life being in jeopardy, but maybe in the case of rape or some other situations which we believe justify abortion. So yeah, some states will be in the middle somewhere and legalize many abortions, but not all of them, like the most liberal states would. So it just depends on the state, really.
Right. So this is federalism, and federalism is the idea that states should be independent governments that make decisions based on the voting population and the representation of that population, and that the federal government is there to protect state rights and to provide general services such as military protection of the nation and things like that. And so you've got sort of a nationalism idea that the federal government should sort of take over most of the power across the country and make sweeping laws that govern the entire country. And then Radical federalism would be the opposite, that states should be completely independent. And so the idea here is that with Roe v. Wade being overturned, the Constitution, which governs the entire nation, does not speak to what individual states ought to do in terms of abortion, and that those decisions are then left up to the population of the state to vote on. So, in a sense, there's more freedom there, not less.
That is actually kind of complicated, because part of what the Constitution is supposed to do is it's not just supposed to protect states' rights, but the 10th Amendment says that the rights not enumerated in the Constitution or specifically outlined for the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. So the federal government is also there to protect the individual rights of citizens against the state governments. For example, one glaring example is in the case of the Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado, where the state courts were going after I forget his name.
Jack
do you remember
Robinson?
his name, Nick or Joel?
Jack Robinson, was that it?
Jack Robinson, I think something like that. Jack Phillips or something like that.
Jack
but
Phillips,
the Colorado. Yes. Yeah, the Colorado state courts were going after him because he served gay people and would allow them to buy any cake in his establishment, but he would not violate he wanted to use his right to free speech to not be forced to bake cakes specifically with a specific message supporting gay marriage, which was something he did not believe in. The state courts were trying to ruin him and run him out of business, and so the federal court stepped in and said, no, you can't do this. He has a right to free speech, etc. So part of what the federal government is supposed to do is also to protect the rights of individual citizens from the state governments. Now, abortion, of course, a state cannot legalize murder, for example, or rape or anything like that. But with abortion is essentially legalized murder because it's allowing a woman to go in and have her child killed. It's allowing abortionists to kill a human child. So abortion actually violates the 5th and 14th Amendment rights of human fetuses. And I can get more into that too, because a lot of people would argue that they don't have rights under the 5th or 14th Amendments. They're wrong. But so allowing the states to legalize abortion is actually a violation of the Constitution too. And the federal government should step in and say, no, they should rule the other way, that no, you can't have abortion permissible because it violates the rights of human beings. And regardless of whether or not fetuses are American citizens, we're talking about fundamental human rights here. Fundamental human rights are rights that are enjoyed by all human beings, regardless of citizenship. I can't kill an Italian citizen here in America just because you're not an American citizen. So even if fetuses aren't technically American citizens because they haven't been born or naturalized here, they have yet to be born, they still have these fundamental human rights which are protected by the Constitution. So it's actually unconstitutional to allow any states to allow abortion. But so we can actually kind of say that this is a bit of a compromise, at least at the moment, because a lot of children are going to be saved by outlawing Roe. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's much better than the situation we have right now, which is that in all states, abortion is legal up until at least viability, up until the point of birth in all states, if the woman can convince that it's part of her health. So that's still a bit of a complicated discussion there too, because I would argue that allowing abortion is actually unconstitutional based on it's a violation of the fundamental human right to life enjoyed by all human beings. And since fetuses are human beings, they have that fundamental right to life too. But this is this isn't a perfect solution, because obviously now some states are able to legalize abortion, as much as they want to, but it's a much better situation than we have going on right now.
Okay, so
I've seen some memes going around the internet too. If people are showing some like eggs cooked for breakfast or something and saying, according to pro-lifers, I had chicken for breakfast.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Do you want me to give a response to it, or?
Yeah, because a lot of people are seeing this, and I know it's bad philosophy as well, but I think it'd be good to have
it's bad biology is what it is.
Well, it's bad biology, but it's also bad philosophy, as Nick knows, because he's he's a fan of Saint Thomas Aquinas too, and so my answer will not be news to Nick, I'm sure, and I'm sure it won't be news to Joel either, because I know you've heard me talk about this, and I'm not sure how you feel about Thomism and that kind of thing, but yeah, essentially this confuses passive potential with active potential, and so yeah, and like you said, it's bad biology because for one thing, the eggs that you buy at the supermarket, most of them have not been fertilized by the chicken, which means there is no chicken embryo even in the egg. So you can't, in any sense, say, "Oh, I just had chicken for breakfast by having this egg," because it's most likely has not been fertilized by the male. Male. Are hens male or hens are male, right? Or are the chickens male?
Roosters are
The
male.
rooster is male and the hen is female.
Oh, the rooster is male. Okay, right. They have not been. Yeah, so they haven't been fertilized by the male. So you haven't had chicken for breakfast. But
Right.
also,
So this is
you're
along the
confusing
same
the
lines
egg
as people
itself.
who argue that every time a woman has her period, it's like an abortion, or every time
Right.
a man.
Or another.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I've seen another meme I've seen is like showing cake ingredients and say, "Look, I have a cake," but no, that because the thing is, a cake is more of an artifact. It's something you make artificially, as opposed to a human being, which is a living thing. It begins at the very beginning, and it is the same thing throughout all of its development because it develops itself from within, as opposed to something like a cake where you have to actually mix all the ingredients together, cook it, and then it's not an actual cake until it serves the function of a cake. Just like your car is not a car unless it's able to perform the function of a car, driving from point A to point B. Otherwise, it's just a very expensive, very heavy paperweight. It's a car in name only if it's not able to fulfill the function of a car. So when we talk about
with
just
the
looking at
cake
like an
example,
egg,
that would be like having the sperm and the egg separately and saying, "I have a baby." No, you
right?
put them
Yeah,
together, then you have a
that's
baby, and that's always been the position.
right. Exactly. Yeah. So the sperm and the egg, the sperm and the ovum, I should say more technically, are more like the cake batter and the sugar and the flour and all the stuff you mix together. Once you combine the sperm and the ovum together, a new human embryo comes into existence, and so you don't need it to. People get this image of like cooking in the womb, and once it comes out, it's a fully formed human being. But that's wrong-headed. It's a fully fledged human being right at the very beginning, and it's developing itself in the womb. And the thing is, when a human being is born, it's not fully developed. It still has a lot of development to do. In fact, human beings are actually unique in that we're one of the only species that on Earth that is completely helpless when we come out of the womb. We can't walk when you come out of the womb or anything like that. Our parents still have to basically tend to us constantly in order to keep us alive, even right out of the womb. So yeah, so this idea about like a chicken egg being a chicken, the chicken embryo, because the chicken is a living thing that develops itself from within. The chicken embryo is a chicken right from the beginning, but the egg that you consume from the supermarket is not. It's a it comes out of a chicken, but it hasn't been fertilized, so there's no living embryo inside the egg just yet. And so and again, the cake ingredients, it's not a cake until it actually comes out of the oven, because a cake is something you make artificially. It's not something that just comes together and then develops itself, and you just kind of put the ingredients there, walk away, come back in 10 hours, and the cake will just magically be there. No, human beings are different in that once the human comes into existence, it remains what it is throughout its development. There's a biological continuity there from when it comes into existence as an embryo until it dies naturally.
So one of the things that I'm seeing a lot is this refrain that people are going to die. Can you explain what the deal is there? I mean, how are people going to die?
Oh, you mean if Roe v. Wade is overturned?
Yeah, this is a left talking
yeah.
point that I'm seeing posted. Like, now people are going to die. They're trying to kill people, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's just fear mongering, plain and simple.
Yeah, but what do they mean?
Has always been about. Well, yeah, I mean, the left has always been about fear mongering. I mean, my nieces who are half Mexican, they were born here in the United States, but they're half Mexican. They were convinced by their leftist family members that they were going to be deported back to Mexico if President Trump was elected president. So, fear mongering has always been a tactic of, quote, progressives, end quote. And this is no different. There wasn't.
But what's the reasoning? How are people dying?
Well, yeah, a long time in history, abortions were dangerous. It wasn't until Dr. What's his name? Aborting America. Dr. Nathanson, Bernard Nathanson actually wrote that it's actually, it wasn't legalizing abortion that made abortion safer. It was actually developments in medical technology, like the discovery of penicillin, that made abortion safer. So there's this idea from pro-choice people, and it's been they've been saying this ever since abortion, ever since they formed the pro-choice movement to try to get abortion legalized in the 1960s, that illegal abortions are dangerous because women are going to go out and shove a coat hanger into themselves and end up killing themselves because of it, or they're going to go to like back alley butchers who are just going to not sterilize in their needles or anything like that, and that's why making abortion illegal is going to make it more dangerous. But Dr. Nathanson, in his book Aborting America, actually talks about it's not making it legal that made it safer. It's actually the advancements in medical technology, like discovery of penicillin. And if abortion is ever driven underground again, as we're going to see it here pretty soon, at least in many states, there's still technology that's going to make it a lot safer to do an illegal abortion than it was prior to 1973 when Roe v. Wade was decided. But there are also other factors that we need to consider, that there are going to be doctors who are performing abortions illegally, doctors who are competent medical professionals. So even before abortion was legalized in 1973, we know from a Planned Parenthood conference in 69 or 70 that the majority of illegal abortions were being performed by doctors in good standing in their community. Having dangerous illegal back alley abortions was actually pretty much a myth. There were some of them going on, I'm sure, but for the most part, the stats that the speaker Mary Calderon quoted was that at least 90% of illegal abortions were being done by competent doctors in good standing in their community. So once abortion is driven underground again, there's no reason to expect that women are going to start dying in droves. And we also have to consider that without abortion as a safety net in case contraception fails or whatever, more men and women are going to be responsible about their sexual choices. We're already seeing women saying, "Oh, I'm going on a sex strike now because abortion is no longer allowed," and talking about how they want to, how they're not going to have any more sex because they can't have abortions. They're probably just being what's that word where you like exaggerate something for emotional effect.
Pedantic?
No. Oh, what's the word? I'm blanking on it. It's well,
Inflammatory.
anyway, they might. No, it's not that word. But anyway, they're probably just exaggerating. But so you'll see conservatives writing on Facebook like, "Oh, I'm glad pro-choicers are finally discovering how human reproduction works." But without abortion as that safety net, there are going to be a lot fewer men and women who are having, you know, unsafe abortions or unprotected sex. I mean, yeah, not unsafe abortions, but unsafe sex. Where they're not using contraceptive methods. So they're going to be a lot more careful about that, which means we're probably going to see even fewer unplanned pregnancies once this happens, and so we're going to have fewer women who actually, I say need. I'm talking about it by their perspective. We're going to see fewer women who need abortions because they're not going to have these abortions as a safety net any longer. So there's a lot of factors that we have to consider when we actually talk about these kinds of things. But when a pro-choice person says that women are suddenly going to start dying because of illegal abortions, number one, there's no real reason to take that seriously. But number two, fear-mongering and exaggeration has always been a part of the pro-choice talking points ever since they started trying to push for legalized abortion in the 1960s.
Well, let's talk a little bit also about another fear point I've seen too going on with saying where you see like this domino effect. Okay, Roe v. Wade gets overturned, and then the marriage debate gets overturned, and we go all the way back, and finally slavery returns once again. That's the goal.
Oh,
That's a slippery slope argument.
Yep. And if you fall for one slippery
it
slope
is,
argument, you fall for all of them.
I had not heard that one before.
Yeah, this is the thing. Yeah, neither have I. But this is the thing about slippery slope arguments. Not all slippery slope arguments are fallacious. If there is warrant for your slippery slope, you're not making a fallacious argument. So, for example, saying that support for abortion will lead to support for infanticide. That is a slippery slope with warrant, because the argument um, that pro-choice people make are many of them, not all of them. Bodily rights arguments obviously don't, but arguments against the humanity and personhood of the fetus work equally well to against the personhood and humanity of the infant. So, by the reasoning of many pro-choice advocates, taking their reasoning to its logical conclusion, they should also justify infanticide. In fact, we see most pro-choice philosophers actually believe infanticide is permissible. So saying support for abortion justify or will lead to support for infanticide is a slippery slope argument with warrant. Saying that making abortions illegal is going to lead to bringing slavery back, there's no warrant for that. In fact, others I've seen, Eric Swalwell, I think is his name, or Stilwell, who was actually caught having sexual relations with a Chinese spy, tweeted out saying that that next conservatives are going to go after interracial marriage and overturn Loving v. Virginia to where interracial marriage is no longer allowed. And again, there's no warrant for that, because abortion is the biggest killer of black babies in America. So we're actually trying to ensure that more black people are born. So that should throw the racism element or racism argument right out the window. But also, there's no reason to think that because we're trying to defend the natural rights of all people, including black people and people of other races, that we're suddenly going to be opposed to marriage between races. But also, a third point to bring up is that the Supreme Court justice with the most seniority on the Supreme Court is Clarence Thomas, a black conservative in an interracial marriage. His wife is white. So why in the world does anyone think that conservatives are going to go after interracial marriage next, especially because the Supreme Court justice that was nominated by Republicans is in an interracial marriage? In fact, Republicans historically are the party of anti-racism. They're the party of Lincoln. They're the party of slavery abolition, whereas the Democrat Party is the party of Jim Crow and the party of the KKK. So there's absolutely no warrant for thinking that Republicans that conservatives are going to bring back slavery, or we're going to go after interracial marriage. President Joe Biden has said that once Roe v. Wade is overturned, we're going to start segregating against gay kids in classrooms. That gay kids are not going to be allowed with straight kids any longer in classrooms, which again is completely ridiculous. There's no warrant for that slippery slope at all, because again, we're trying to argue for the natural rights of all human beings. We're not trying to take rights away from anyone. They think that because we want to take the legal right to abortion away from women by respecting the natural right to life of all human beings, that we suddenly just want to take rights away from all people that we disagree with. And that's just ridiculous. And it shows that they're just completely out of touch with reality and have no idea what pro-life people even actually believe.
So it seems like the argument that as I understand it, is that, and this is, I've actually heard this, that we've put religious extremists on the court, and that we're turning America into a theocracy or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
And so, I don't know what the religious status of the Supreme Court members are. I'm not sure if that's public knowledge or not, but
down their addresses are.
Yeah. Thomas and Alito are Christians. Alito, I believe, is Catholic. I could be wrong on that, but I know at least those two are religious. Amy Barrett, I believe, is also religious. In fact, she has a really big family, which is kind of one of the hallmarks of being religious. So, she has like 8 kids or something.
That scared really them when they were considering her for the court, right?
It did. Yeah, that was like one of the main talking points. Was
Two of them are adopted, I think.
Like denigrating. Yeah, some of them are adopted. Yeah, because they were just denigrating Amy Coney Barrett for how many kids she had. And again, Amy Barrett is another counterexample to the pro-choice narrative that pro-life people don't care about kids after they're born. Well, Amy Coney Barrett has adopted kids, so what are they going to say about her? That's
Yeah. And so
I think
but the idea is that if you have a bunch of conservative religious people on the Supreme Court, that they're going to be enshrining all of their doctrines into constitutional law, under the auspices of saying, well, this is constitutional because I believe in it. So you've got activist judges, and everything that they fear, everything they believe that conservatives want, which I suppose means utter restrictions and denigration of human rights, to I suppose everyone who isn't white, uh, are going to be thrown out the window, because they've got the power to do that, to enshrine you know our ideals into constitutional law from the bench, um, which seems extremist. And I don't know, does any party believe in legislating from the bench?
One does.
Yeah, the Democrats.
Right. So there's a bit of projectionist that seems to be going on there.
We've talked about a lot of things that aren't real, that are trying to be pushed as fears, but there is one thing that is real. I think should be pushed as a fear that we haven't talked about yet. This ruling was leaked. That is something that's a whole lot more scary than people realize, I think.
Yeah, there's actually been a lot of leaks going on. A lot of important documents have been leaked. Um, like some things regarding like Elon Musk and his buyout of Twitter. Some of the important documents there were leaked, and it's just there's like a where's my camera here, like a document leak culture now. It's like whenever there's some kind of important controversial thing that's going to be happen, like something's going to be leaked, so that the people who disagree with it can apply pressure to those. And so you had liberals accusing the conservative justices or clerks of leaking it, because that way if a Supreme Court justice would change his mind at the last minute, it would look like he was caving to public pressure. But then you had conservatives accusing the liberal justices or their clerks of leaking it, because that would try and put public pressure on the conservative justices to change their minds. And I've seen evidence that it's not conclusive by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not accusing anybody, but I saw someone who put forth evidence that it may have been the clerk of Justice Sotomayor who actually leaked the document, because the person who reported on it had done a report on the clerk before, and so there's something that may look a little bit fishy. Obviously it's not conclusive, but it looks a little suspicious. But the Chief Justice Roberts did say he's launching an investigation into it. So we may never know for sure, or his investigation may turn out who did it. There's just no way to know for sure until we get an official word from Chief Justice Roberts. But yeah, like you said, the addresses of the conservative justices they've been doxxed, so their addresses have been released, and now, in violation of federal law, picketers have gone and started protesting outside of these justices' homes. It's an actual violation of federal law, because they're trying to affect the outcome of justice by going and picketing at these justices' homes. And even crazier is President Biden's official position is to encourage these protesters to go, which again is in violation of federal law. Now, considering that the president of the United States is the executive branch of the federal government, the executive branch is the law enforcement branch, and he is encouraging these picketers to go out and violate federal law by protesting in front of these justices' homes. I believe, I'm not a legal expert, but I believe that Joe Biden has probably committed an impeachable offense by doing so, because he swore to uphold and defend the Constitution from threats, both domestic and foreign. And now he is violating his own office of President of the United States by encouraging illegal behavior on the part of these picketers and protesters. So I believe he's probably committed an impeachable offense. The problem is, while I think he should be probably impeached over this, if he gets removed, we get Kamala Harris as president, and she's arguably worse, than Joe Biden. So justice is not going to be done here. Nothing's going to be done about these protesters or about President Biden encouraging illegal behavior. But if justice was done, we'd probably be in even worse shape by having Kamala Harris as our president. So. And again, I've said some unkind things about Democrats here. I'm not opposed to all Democrats. I'm opposed to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the many of the Democrats and Republicans in the government. So if you're just like just like the average Democrat who just wants to do what's right, may disagree with me on issues, I have no issues with you. In fact, there are some Democrats which if they were pushed forward to run for president instead of horrible people like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, some Democrats I might actually consider voting for because I think they'd be better than some Republicans that they put forward as running. But those Democrats that I would vote for are threats to the Democrat establishment in the government. So they'll never be allowed to run for president. In fact, there's one Democrat. What's her name?
Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard. I like Tulsi Gabbard. I think she's a good person. I disagree with her on some issues. I think she wants to do what's right. And she did run for president, but she was basically screwed over by the Democrats. She was eligible to participate in the Democratic debates, but but at the last minute they changed the rules so that Tulsi Gabbard could not go and debate Hillary Clinton when she was trying to run for president. So they did dirty by Tulsi Gabbard because she, as a moderate Democrat, is a threat to Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and all the career Democrat politicians. But she's one that I would actually, depending on the Republican running, if the Republican running was bad, I'd probably vote for Tulsi Gabbard over them. But there's one Republican in particular I hope who does run in 2024. But yeah.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
But anyway, yeah. So like I said, it's not all Democrats that I dislike. It's just the career politicians, and there are some Democrats that I actually do like quite a bit. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Joel.
Don't worry about it.
I also think we should stay with this whole thing with these people are protesting. Some people are saying that we have a right to protest. We have a right to peaceful assembly. That's in the Constitution. Yes, but not outside of someone's private residence. That is a specific violation of law.
Well, especially as
public assembly means public, not private.
Right, but especially a Supreme Court justice. Trying to put public pressure on them to change a ruling. That is unethical on top of being unconstitutional and illegal. Because no right is absolute. People have the right to peaceably assemble and protest, but there are limitations to even to that. And trying to publicly sway the Supreme Court justices to change an opinion is a limitation on our fundamental right to protest peaceably.
And really, is this kind of world we'd want to live in anyway, where if you don't like someone's ruling on something, you just go and you intimidate them until they change their mind? Is that the kind of precedent we want to be setting?
It's interesting because I think the leaked documents were done so in a climate which we're all fairly aware of, wherein any sort of individual who is outed with an unpopular position has a tremendous amount of public pressure placed against them by sort of an activist country, at least 50% of it. And so, it's become a strategy at this point to sort of out the person who has an unpopular opinion so that the crowd can shout them down. And so you're seeing this at the macro and micro level. And, I think that whoever leaked the document was probably fully aware of exactly what was going to happen once the document was outed, and it was an intentional act. Now, here's my thinking about this. And Nick, you're the person to ask about this. Has America kind of reverted back to a honor shame culture?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question to ask. Before I do answer, I do want to stress anyone who can see the podcast going on can see that this is in my name, but I haven't yet let everyone know I do still affirm a virgin birth, and I want to make sure that was known. But honestly, you can.
I hadn't heard you affirm it this hour, so thanks for reminding us that you haven't fallen into apostasy there.
Yeah, but the
Oh,
thing
look at
is,
that! It is 10 o'clock. It's every hour on the hour, right?
but the thing is, you can't fully escape
Yeah.
an honor shame culture.
Okay.
Reality, we as much as we try to be individualistic, that is still there. I mean, think back to high school. You want the, the kid set who was popular and who wasn't, and you had different things you could do to increase your popularity and things you could do to decrease your popularity. And that's still going on. I think implicitly, this is the way most of us really live. We're just now seeing it come out. And the thing is, unfortunately, we're letting the extreme left determine what is considered honorable and shameful around us. Now, what I'd also be concerned by is I just got done reading a book of Pagans and Christians in the City, where he argues that paganism is still around. In fact, your modern secularist is more pagan than anything else because you try and find what's of transcendent and ultimate value. It comes from within the system instead of without. And in our society,
Yeah.
sex and government, I think, are two of the big things. If abortion had nothing to do with sex, this would not be an issue at all. That's why
Right.
this is an issue. And the extremes I find people are going to defend abortion, it's quite funny. I mean, you have people, I've seen people, videos of people going into a church service dressed in those handmade tails outfits. I know several Christians. I don't know a single one who wants anything like handmaid's tale to take place.
Right.
Yeah, I
Not
have
even,
no idea what that is.
yeah, and we've had this person who went on Twitter about this and said this is a call to arms.
Hmm.
Now, last I checked, inciting
Yeah.
violence has normally been condemned on the left, but the rules just seem to change
Really?
depending on what's going on.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, they've been calling for violence for a long time now. If it hasn't been a part of the left, it was a long time ago when they didn't call for violence because they've been calling for it for a
Yeah.
long time with the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that. But yeah, I was your analogy about like high school it really hit home because I was not popular in school,
Mm-hmm.
and that it caused me to think. I don't know if you guys listen to like Bowling for Soup.
I've
They have that
heard of
song "High
some of
School
their
Never
songs.
Ends."
Oh no, I haven't heard
Yeah,
that
they have
one.
that song "High School Never Ends."
Yeah, I've heard
The
that.
whole dang world is just as obsessed with who's the best dressed and who's having sex, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
just all these drama things we deal with in high school, just continue on into adulthood, and it kind of caused me to think of that. But yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting to me how sex has become sort of the new sacred. Well, I don't know if it's new. I mean, that's
It's
kind of,
not new.
yeah, it's sort of been around. I guess the fact that sex
yeah. I
is
mean,
sacredized is difficult for me to wrap my head around because there's nothing particularly transcendent or um what's the best way to put this? I don't know, kind of transcendent is probably the best way to put it. When I think of sex as compared to things like um mathematical formula or art or great literature or things like that. I mean, the thing about sex is A, there's a pleasurable side to it, and B, there's a sense of intimacy that you don't get elsewhere. And those are important things, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Especially intimacy. It's something we crave. I think it's why romantic subplots are part of every story ever told, is that there's this craving or desire for intimacy within us. And, sex kind of is given as the gateway to that. But there are certainly things that seem more holy and, transcendent in the world, uh, beyond simply the physical enjoyment of sex.
Well, Joe, I'm really going to disagree with you a lot on this end here. I think if anyone should be teaching the sacredness of sex and the transcendence of it, it is Christians. We should be the ones celebrating it the most. I mean, we've got a whole book in the Bible, the book of the Song of Songs, dedicated to this topic. And I think sex hits us on a number of levels. There's the desire for intimacy, like you said, yes. But to give a desire, you have to go ultimately outside of yourself. You have to be fully connected with another human being. And then there's the desire for beauty as well. And beauty is something that ultimately stuns us, especially men. There's a reason pornography is so popular among men. And I'm not justifying it for a second. It's wrong, definitely. But there is a real reason there. Men want to see beauty, and to a man, nothing is more beautiful than the human female form. That's it. And sex gives us that. And I think sex is meant to be also a picture of the relationship that takes place within the Trinity. The intimacy we experience in sexual union is meant to be a mirror of what takes place in the Trinity itself.
Well, I suppose when I think about it, sex has an animalistic aspect to it in that it's something that's done by every species that reproduces sexually.
Even
Um,
educated fleas do it.
well, there you go. But my point is that only humans can do things like create art.
Mhm.
Only humans can do things like mathematics, science, reason. All of these things seem more important and, I don't know, more meaningful to me than sex. You know, if I had to give up either these sort of transcendent pursuits or sex, I would select the sex over the transcendent pursuits to give up because these things are more meaningful in the long run to me.
I agree with you ultimately they are more meaningful, but there is still that great longing. I mean, I'm speaking now, sadly, as a divorced man, something I never wanted. And I can say, yes, that longing is there still, and I'm still following the proper rule as I see it, saving for marriage. But it is something that I do think about quite often because, God puts that desire in us. I think. And like I said, the sexual desire is meant to be a mirror of a desire we're supposed to have for God Himself.
I suppose I think that maybe part of it is it's become so secularized that it has almost become distasteful as a concept.
Yeah, and if we do that, we're just letting the world set the standard for us. If anything, the church should be leaning away and saying, yeah, we had this first. Our God made this. It was His idea. He designed everything, and we celebrate it. The fact that we hardly speak about it in the church is a major, major problem. I go to churches and I hardly ever hear anything. And you know how many guys in the church are struggling with pornography, and yet what we say? Nothing. And girls are struggling now too. Guys say that girls are struggling too.
Well, I'm sure all of that is true. Um, at any rate, yeah, this idea that sex has almost become a religious thing
Oh
for
yeah.
the sort of non-religious crowd. It has become the sacred cow at whose feet they worship, and I mean, again, like I said, it seems like there are things more transcendent and beautiful um, about that only humans can aspire to.
Well, Chesterton once
Hmm.
said, G.K. Chesterton once said, when a man knocks on the door of a brothel, which for those might not know, that's a house of prostitution, he said, he's looking for God.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
hard to argue
anyway.
against Chesterton.
Yeah. Right.
So I think that it's
Yeah.
probably worth bringing up this, constant refrain that the pro-life movement is all about controlling women,
Hmm.
because that seems to be the it's another one of these things where I am told what it is that I believe by the other side.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas, they don't listen to what it is that I actually believe or what I have to say. They're telling
Hmm.
me what I believe, um,
Right.
with the expectation that I'm going to then stand there and defend the thing that they're telling me I
Yeah.
believe. Um, but this
Right.
is really the
And yeah,
refrain: is that we're deeply concerned about controlling the body of women.
yeah, and this is this really speaks to the breakdown of communication. I think is that no one you talk to about abortion since this majority opinion draft. It's just a draft. It's still possible for a Supreme Court justice to change his mind. Up until the final decision is made. So this is just a draft of the opinion. Although Clarence Thomas has come out and said that the justices are planning to hold firm. They have no plans on changing their vote. But no one that you're going to have a discussion with that has actually ever even read this document, this opinion written by Justice Alito. So, you know, the problem is no one even knows what the arguments are for the Supreme Court overturning these decisions. So I think that's you know that's one of the major problems with this discussion is that you're just going to continue to encounter the same pro-choice talking points they've always had. You're not going to have anyone who's actually engaging with the arguments made in the decision.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I mean, this
something.
is often framed as a religious issue, when I think that you would find that the underlying question is whether or not it's murder, because religious or not, I think we're all
Right.
more or less agreed that murder is not a good thing and is something that the law should
Right.
work against. And
Yeah.
so you would have to explain why it is that religion requires us to say that life begins at a certain point versus science or whatever it is that you're judging that's non-religious. And I don't see a lot of pro-life arguments being put forth with a sort of Bible thumping, the Lord says kind of deal as to
Right.
whether or not it's murder to kill a baby in the womb.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's something that the
yeah.
pro-life movement has gotten really good at, is in focusing on that fundamental question of what is the unborn. So we're capable of having that religious discussion, but 99.9% of pro-life people are just going to focus on the question of what is the unborn. The unborn are biological human beings. They have fundamental human rights, so we're obligated to protect them in law.
And Clinton, you've given any reasons here for life begins at conception or anything like that, I haven't seen you quote a single Bible verse at all. We could even say that we could just as easily had someone on from secular pro life, and they could have made the exact
Yeah,
same arguments.
right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
it
In
must
fact,
be difficult for
yeah,
secular pro-life to be lumped in with religious
well, it
people.
is. Yeah, yeah. The ladies who run Secular Pro Life are my friends, and I've had discussions with them. And one common thing that they hear is that they're just undercover religious people because they make a scientific case for the life and humanity of the unborn. Yeah, and so the thing is that this is something that's been going on ever since the '60s. Just Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who wrote that book, Aborting America, he was on the forefront of arguing for abortion rights and pushing to legalize abortion. He founded NARAL, Pro-Choice America, um, the National Abortion Rights Action League, which was called something different at the time, but after abortion was legalized, they changed the name. But he was at the forefront of pushing for abortion rights. Then, sometime after abortion becomes legal, he becomes pro-life and writes this book, Aborting America, in which he actually talks about the history of abortion activism. And one of their main strategies, right from the very beginning, was making this a religious issue. They went around, they found pro-choice religious authorities, pastors, imams, whomever, and had them start, talking about how this is a religious issue. And, ever since the very beginning, they made it a women's rights issue, a feminist issue, which would have been foreign to the original feminists, the ones fighting for real rights, like the right to vote and own property, that kind of thing. The original feminists were staunchly pro-life. But in the 1960s, the feminists were suddenly somehow convinced by men that they needed abortion, which is ironic because abortion really only helps men. It doesn't really help women. But they were convinced that it's a feminist issue, but they also made it a religious issue. And so even today, like I said, the pro-life movement is really good about focusing on what that central question is. The only time most of us, especially those of us who actually do work in the movement, the only time we get religious when we're making the case is if we're dealing with faulty pro-choice religious arguments. Like a common one that I've been seeing ever since that Supreme Court leak is, people are circulating this meme that says the Bible doesn't say life begins at conception. It says it begins at first breath. Look at Genesis 2:7. God breathed the breath of life into Adam and he became a living soul. Well, that's a faulty understanding of that verse. And that's why now I have to get religious, because you have people who are reading into the Bible their own interpretation instead of getting out of it what's the intended purpose. The Genesis 2:7 says nothing about when human life begins. It does say that because God created Adam of the dust of the ground, that God had to breathe the breath of life into him because he was created under a special circumstance. That says nothing about the ordinary circumstance of human reproduction. So that's not a normative claim about when life begins. It's just one specific claim about how Adam had to be brought to life because of the special way he was created.
I also had someone
Genesis
show up
2:7 is one faulty. Yeah, go ahead.
I also had someone show up on my Facebook page trying to show that Numbers 5, the case of the test for an unfaithful wife, was making
and again that's
argument for
yeah and again
abortion.
that's not a recipe for an abortion. That's a test to weed out adultery. A woman, if she drank the potion, nothing would happen to her. If and that was a way for her guilt in adultery to be known. If there were no witnesses, if the man believed that his wife had committed adultery, he could take her before the priest, have the priest make this concoction, have her drink it. If she was guilty, she'd become barren. It has nothing to do with whether or not she had, it had nothing to do with an abortion. It had to do with making her barren if she was guilty of the adultery. So again, it's not a recipe for an abortion. It's just
for a woman.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you addressed that, because that's not something I've heard you address before, and I've always been curious what your response to that would be.
Okay, yeah, no, because I've written an article on my blog about some responding to pro-choice arguments from the Bible. So if anyone's listening and wants to go check it out, prolifephilosophy.blogspot.com is my blog. You can of course follow it, because I'm going to start posting some of the ridiculous arguments I've been seeing. I'm going to read through that Supreme Court decision, the draft, and then summarize the arguments. But I'm also going to summarize a lot of these really ridiculous arguments I've seen and respond to them. And a lot of them, there's a lot of religious arguments being made, which are made from faulty interpretations of Scripture. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible about abortion, because you don't have to legislate against acts that the people aren't doing. The ancient Jews were not aborting their children. They believed that kids were a gift from God, and that if a woman was barren, that was a curse. So they would not have been aborting their children, because the more children a woman had, the bigger blessing she had from God. And then the early church, Christians were not aborting their kids, so you didn't need it in the New Testament. In fact, the earliest Christian documents we have, which are not in the Bible, the Didache and the Epistle of Barnabas, condemn abortion in no uncertain terms. So abortion has always been condemned by the Christian church, and it's consistently been condemned from the beginning by church authorities. Even after the Protestant Reformation, you see Protestant pastors like John Calvin condemning abortion. There's this quote going around the internet in an image, in a meme, where he says something to the effect of, if it seems worse to kill a man in his home than out in a field, because that's his place of residence, how much worse is it to kill a child in the womb before he's even seen the light of day, or something to that effect. So there's been a consistent testimony from Christians since the beginning of the Christian church, in the New Testament, that abortion is wrong. It's murder. You are, they haven't always agreed on when personhood is established. In fact, you'll sometimes hear people say that the early church supported abortion because some of them didn't believe ensoulment happened until later in pregnancy. But again, that's faulty because Christians have always condemned abortion. They haven't always believed the soul enters the body at conception. Thomas Aquinas believed it happened at, I think, 40 days for boys and 80 days for girls because he accepted the embryological views of Aristotle, which is where he got a lot of his metaphysical views from. Thomas Aquinas did not have the benefit of 19th century embryology, which showed that human life begins at fertilization. And since the soul is the animating factor of the body, the soul is infused in the body at fertilization. The soul begins when the human begins. So he just didn't have the benefit of modern scientific knowledge. But even though there was a debate about when ensoulment happened, the church has always condemned abortion in the strongest possible terms. And I'm not aware of any Christian writing in support of abortion before the 20th century. So that's a very modern idea.
The early church would often rescue infants that had been left abandoned by others, because Romans would often, if they had girls, especially just leave them abandoned to die in the wild. Yeah. And Christians would come by and rescue those girls.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, so Christians were responsible for ending the practice of infanticide in the ancient Roman Empire. It took them 300 or 400 years, but they eventually did it. And so another popular verse pro-choice Christians or pro-choice atheists who want to use the Bible against Christians will often point to is a passage in Deuteronomy also, which talks about if two men are fighting and they accidentally hit a pregnant woman and they say she ends up aborting, there's no punishment, but if there is harm to the woman, they're to pay life for life or whatever. But again, that's also another
where it is.
Or Exodus, right? Yeah, that's correct. Exodus. Yeah, but again, that's another faulty interpretation, because the idea here is not that the child dies. It's if she gives birth prematurely. In fact, I actually did a kind of a word study on this, not a word study in like Hebrew or anything, but I looked up various biblical translations, and all the translations I looked up talked about a premature birth. The only translation that actually said she miscarries was the ESV, which is a known more liberal translation of Scripture. Even the various translations of Scripture agree that this is not a miscarriage that they have in mind, but it's if she gives birth prematurely, if there's any harm to the mother or child, the men who fight are to repay what's owed. If there's no harm done, then no harm, no foul. But if there is harm done, then they're to repay life for life, tooth for tooth, whatever. So that's another favorite passage of pro-choice people to bring up.
It's important also to stress that one of the problems with the idea of why wasn't a death penalty applies, because the pregnant child was not the target of the attack. The pregnant child was more of an accidental victim. Mm-hmm. And when a death was accidental, there was a way to escape the death penalty for it.
Mm. Yeah. You had to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, pretty much. Manslaughter, right?
Yeah. Right, yeah. Or just negligence, I think, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's actually a lot of things that there's something that I know that a lot of Christians aren't even aware of, is that there's a discussion about what kind of killing is permissible in the Old Testament. Killing in self-defense is permissible. There's no criminal charges for someone who kills in self-defense, as long as it's legitimate self-defense. If it's an act of revenge, then that's considered murder. But also, capital punishment was permissible in the ancient Jewish culture also.
Yeah, a little bit. That's a sticking point for atheists sometimes, how much capital punishment was permissible.
It's a sticking point for a lot of pro-life Christians too. I know some people who consider themselves consistent life ethicists. I'm using a lot of air quotes today, but that's because there's a lot of misleading language being used, even by pro-life Christians who call themselves consistent life ethicists, because they're not really consistent life ethicists. They claim to hold life in such high regard that they consider it always inviolable, but the reality is they don't view human life as very high because, according to Scripture, if you take a human life, your life is owed because you're killing someone made in God's image. You're violating someone's life, and life is sacred. It's inviolable. So if you take someone's life, then your life is required. Uh, so yeah, so that's a discussion I've had with pro-life Christians too, who think I'm evil, or ungodly, because I believe capital punishment is still permissible even today. And that is also something you hear from pro-choice Christians too, is they'll try to argue that it's inconsistent to oppose abortion but support capital punishment. And of course, that's just a confusion of very basic categories of innocence versus guilt. We're talking about an innocent human child here, which you kill in an abortion, which is immoral, and then we're talking about a guilty murderer, who is found guilty after a fair trial, after a fair trial by his peers. So it's two different things. We're talking about an innocent child versus a guilty murderer. So that's, yeah, just arguing it's inconsistent is just ridiculous.
But I could see it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but I could see how one might come to that conclusion. Um,
Well,
and it seems
yeah,
more
if
defensible than abortion is.
well, I mean, yeah, yeah, there are some people who think it's. I mean, some pro-life people who think they have to. But there's some pro-life people who think you're inconsistent if you're not a vegan and you're pro-life. Pro-life vegans will argue that pro-life people who eat meat are also being inconsistent. And again, it's just a confusion of very basic categories. You might think I'm wrong, but I'm not being inconsistent because none of my views are being held inconsistently. I'm not inconsistent for being pro-life and supporting capital punishment because I believe it's permissible to kill a guilty murderer. It's not permissible to kill an innocent child. I'm not inconsistent for believing for eating meat because I believe it's permissible to kill animals to consume for food. I don't believe it's permissible to kill them for just any reason. I think it's wrong to hunt for sport, for example, but I'm not inconsistent because I believe it's permissible to kill animals to consume for food, but it's not permissible to kill humans based on the kind of things that they are. So my beliefs, so I'm not being inconsistent because of my very specific beliefs. You might argue I'm wrong, and that's fine. That's a discussion we can have. But to argue I'm inconsistent is just to completely ignore, the various nuances of my pro-life position.
Yeah, have you ever considered sort of the satirical essay by Jonathan Swift called A Reasonable Proposal?
A modest proposal.
A modest
A modest
proposal.
proposal, yeah.
As sort of a something to compare to the pro-choice position?
Well, I mean, yeah, I've thought about it. I've read some of A Modest Proposal. I haven't read the entire thing, so I as it stands right now, I wouldn't be the one to do that. But yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with some of the satirical things that Jonathan Swift wrote in that, about using Jews as lampshades and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can find pro-choice satire, pro-life satire about pro-choice people out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like the same idea that, for the betterment of society, you sacrifice, you know, people and it works out for everyone.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, because that's the argument they make, that for the good of society, for the good of women, whatever, we need to be able to kill these individuals. In this case, it's we need to kill their children because despite the fact that we can point to many conservative counterexamples of women who had children and were still able to graduate high school and college, still able to work. Women need abortion because they can't continue school, they can't work if they have kids. All of these, all of these reasons they come up with for why women need abortion.
And I'm glad you said that one also because it goes back to what Joe said also about kinds of people. Because something I'm saying, and this strikes me personally, is curing children who have disabilities because it's ultimately been decided, their lives are going to be miserable, they're not worth living. And I speak
Right.
as
Yeah.
someone
Life
who,
unworthy of life, which,
I speak as
yeah.
someone who is disabled and say, yeah, my life I think is worth living, and I do enjoy that life very much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels that we can draw. I mean, obviously you can draw parallels from abortion to other atrocities like the Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide, slavery, the Tuskegee experiments, things like that. You can draw all these sorts of parallels there. You can also draw parallels with eugenics, because Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood, was a eugenicist. She
Hmm.
believed that she was racist, and she was a
Very
eugenicist.
much
She
so.
believed that. Black people should not be reproducing. She believed poor people shouldn't be reproducing. So now it's also worth noting that she actually opposed abortion. She did not support abortion, but she did support getting those people contraception so that they wouldn't be reproducing. So she wasn't a good person. She was racist. She was a eugenicist, but she did not believe in abortion, which was surprising when I when I learned about that. But yeah, I mean, you can find books that talk about that. Yeah, so yeah, I'm not entirely sure when it was Planned Parenthood started, but no, actually, the interesting thing, my friend Mark Newman, who is an instructor who teaches public speaking and does a lot of great work for the pro life movement, trains pro life speakers and people at pregnancy care centers how to make the case and how to speak well and things like that. He actually has a copy of a brochure, and this is a real brochure, and he actually has a copy of it in which Planned Parenthood, in their official brochure, had like a frequently asked questions section, and it said, "Is I believe it said something like is abortion contraception?" And Planned Parenthood responded, "Absolutely not. Abortion kills the life of a baby after it has begun. Contraception just prevents conception." So, in one of Planned Parenthood's own brochures back in the 40s or 50s, real early on, they, they actually said point blank that abortion kills the life of a baby after it has begun. It wasn't until they started pushing for abortion that they suddenly flip flopped, and now all of a sudden it's not a baby; it's a clump of cells. It's just a massive tissue. It's just like removing a tumor, that kind of thing. So they flip flopped on it once they started pushing for abortion. And so I don't know if it was just after Margaret Sanger passed away, they got new leadership that wanted to change. I'm not sure when exactly that change occurred, but it happened at some point. And they actually used to be honest about what abortion does.
Yeah. So, as far as crisis pregnancy care centers go, in my own field of research, which is deconversion, one of the case studies that I did, her husband was a pastor and he volunteered at crisis pregnancy care centers. And you know, she's writing these accounts post deconversion. And so she's talking about all the sort of manipulative techniques that they do to these women, and that it's the same kind of manipulation that goes on in the church to sort of oppress women and tell them their
And,
place.
and
And
who's this you said?
I don't recall her name at this point. I'd have to
Oh,
look it up.
okay.
But she's one of the people I profiled for deconversion. So
Okay.
she married her college boyfriend, and he was a charismatic preacher. And uh,
Oh,
anyway, so she recalls one evening when he gets home after purchasing groceries for one of the women that he was working with at the pregnancy care center. Trying to provide for her needs while she's pregnant and help her. And in her mind, she thinks, well, he's so proud of himself for this, but after she has the baby and has to take care of it on her own, what is he going to do for her? The care stops at the point that the baby is had. And so this whole idea that the pro-life person doesn't care about the woman, just about controlling her choices or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this kind of argument is really just projection on the part of the pro-choice advocate, because pro-life people do a whole heck of a lot for babies after they're born. They do a lot for the baby before they're born, and for the pregnant woman, they give her parenting classes to help her when the baby's born. After the baby's born, they'll give her resources like diapers and car seats, things like that, things that are donated by pro-life people to help these women. And a lot of pro-life people adopt kids. The former director of Justice for All, an organization that I volunteered with, his name is David Lee, and I stayed at his house when I flew out to Kansas to do like some speaking at a seminar and do some training and things like that. And he had like 7 or 8 kids, 4 of them adopted. One of the adopted kids had Down syndrome, so he actually adopted a disabled kid. So David Lee was one pro-life people who lives out his convictions. You can actually find a video of Greg Kokel talking about this on his show, and he did a pro-life episode. And this lady caller calls in and says, "Look, pro-life people don't care about babies after they're born. You just care, you just want them born, and that's all you care about." And then Greg tells her, "Look, I've adopted, however many kids he's adopted." And did that change her mind? No, she just went on to her other talking points. So they don't really care about what we do with these kids. They just care about the ability to kill them. And the thing is, pro-life people are out there doing things for pregnant women, doing things for single mothers, doing things for these kids. I've even heard stories about Planned Parenthood, who refers out to pregnancy care centers because they don't provide prenatal counseling or screenings or anything like that. If you want to keep the kid, they'll do it if you want to kill the kid. But so the thing is, a pro-choice person is number one using this as an excuse because they don't actually want to do the hard work of actually learning what pro-life people believe and then arguing against it. But the thing is that they're too lazy and selfish to do these things themselves. They'd rather just allow women to kill the kids than actually have to step up and do the work themselves and trying to help these women and help these kids, because it's pro-lifers who are doing it. It's not pro-choicers who are out there forming pregnancy care centers and giving these resources. It's pro-life people. So this is just projection on the part of pro-choice people.
Yeah, I would imagine that in their mind, the pregnancy, crisis pregnancy centers are just propaganda wings of pro-life to try to, talk women out of
they'll
having
sometimes call
babies and
them
oppressing.
fake. Yeah, they'll sometimes call them fake abortion clinics. So
Dang.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, because they think they're out there to deceive women. Like, yeah, we do abortions. Come on in, and then they convert them after they come in. But that's it couldn't be further from the truth. They're always, at least the pregnancy care centers, the directors of the pregnancy care centers I've talked to, say that they're always upfront about what their agenda is. They don't do abortions. They don't refer for abortions, but they don't do abortions. So if you're looking for an abortion, we're not going to help you. But if you want counseling, if you want resources to be able to keep your kid, we're here to help you. Come on in. We'd love to talk to you, and we have counselors who can help you. But yeah, so they're not out there telling people that they do abortions just to bring them in the doors. That's absurd that they would even make that claim. And that's a common claim you hear from pro-choice people.
Yeah, that's kind of straw manning. It's so
Yeah.
bizarre how committed they are to this idea. I mean, I can see the idea that, hey, it's an emergency backup for certain situations where you have no other alternative.
Right.
I disagree with that position, but I could see that position.
Right.
But there almost seems to be a glorification of the act of abortion to some degree. And I'm sure we have stepped our way up to that, but even so.
Yeah, it's a definite reversal, because the slogan used to be, what was the slogan?
Safe, legal, and rare.
It was safe, legal, and rare. Thank you. Yeah, I was forgetting one of those. Yeah, the slogan used to be safe, legal, and rare, because they used to want people to believe that they wanted abortions to be rare, but having abortion legal is the way to bring abortion numbers down, which again, that's convoluted logic, because obviously making an act illegal is going to bring the numbers down because people are generally law-abiding citizens. so that the threat of legal action is a deterrent against these crimes. So it used to be safe, legal, and rare, but eventually on down the line they just dropped the word rare, and now it's just safe and legal is what they want. And now they've
Wasn't it?
actually got kind of done a 360, and now they're actually out there actually supporting abortion, and now they're considering abortion to be a good thing, a good thing for society. So it's no longer the case of, abortion is a necessary evil. Now they're actually out there proclaiming, like shout your abortion, and
Yeah.
now they want people to think that abortion is actually a good thing for society.
Yeah, I was going to ask, wasn't there some social media thing when they was celebrate your abortion? Now with yeah, it was shout
Yeah,
your
shout your
abortion.
abortion, celebrate your abortion, right?
Yeah, so I think
Yeah,
the
and
deal behind that was this
you
idea
also
that.
had kind of a.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh no, I was just going to
Uh,
say, just kind of pile on with Nick. I was just going to say that, or yeah, you sound like you might be a little behind on the broadcast here, Joel. Uh,
I think
but
that's true.
yeah, so apologies. So apologies if I talk over you. It's just I think you're a little slightly behind Nick and me here. But yeah, I was just basically just going to pile on with Nick that yeah, we've also had kind of a spat of pro-abortion films. Like there's an abortion comedy that was recently filmed and released, and I think J.J. Abrams recently announced that he wants to do a pro-abortion film. And there's just they're definitely at the point now where let's just start saying abortion is a good thing for society.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's this idea that um, the pro-life side, and I don't know how true this is, has put forth the idea that women always feel shame or they feel sorrow or some kind of bad feeling about having an abortion. Um, or this idea that women who have an abortion should be shamed or something like that. And so it's this reaction against it where, no, I don't feel shame. I take pride in kind of thing. So it's sort of a overcorrection against this idea that um, I suppose they believe pro-lifers have been giving.
Yeah.
To some extent, that there could be some truth to some things like that. And I've often heard it's very dangerous to say, for instance, that if you have sex before you get married, you're going to feel horribly guilty the next day. Not all people do. Some of them feel great the next day. And if you go as far as say, if you do this, you will feel X, that can lead to disaster. Some people could very well feel guilty of having an abortion. Some might, not because they're soulless beasts, maybe they just feel numb. That can happen.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think
In
you
fact,
can say that all women feel one way or feel the other after an abortion. And I
right.
get a similar thing in my area of research with deconversion. There's this sort of idea on one side that you feel very bitter or angry or whatever after a deconversion, and then on the other side, there's this feeling that you have a tremendous feeling of relief and um, freedom after deconversion. And honestly, the truth is messy. It's somewhere in between. Deconversion's a very messy
Yeah.
process, and there's a lot of feelings that come with it.
Yeah, and Scripture even talks about people who've had their consciences seared with a hot iron. So, even biblically speaking, we can't claim that if someone sins, like someone who is watching pornography or something, is definitely going to feel bad about it afterward, because they might have been doing it for so long that they just have become numb to that nagging feeling that what they're doing is wrong. And when we're talking about something like abortion, um, you know if it's really hard to convince a post-abortive woman that abortion is wrong, is tantamount to murder, because then you're basically having to convince her that she sanctioned the murder of her child. So there's a lot of complicated emotions that can muddy the waters there. There is evidence, and this is denied by the pro-abortion movement as a whole. There is evidence that women do, some women, not all women, some women regret their abortions. There is evidence that there is a link between abortion and breast cancer. It's not conclusive. There is evidence for it. It's not proof. We don't know conclusively one way or the other, but there is some evidence for it. which bears further investigation. But all of these things are denied by the pro-choice movement because they're desperate to convince people that there's absolutely nothing wrong with abortion. And so, if a woman has been convinced that it's not a baby, it's just a clump of cells, then after she has an abortion, she may not feel bad about it because she's been deceived about what it is she actually had happen to her. Now, that's not true of all women, again, because some women who've been lied to might actually have this feeling that even though they believed that's a clump of cells, if the baby is far enough along, when they have that baby removed, there might be that intrinsic feeling there that they know something more than just having a clump of cells removed was done in the abortion. So it's very complicated. And yeah, like you were saying, we can't make dogmatic claims one way or the other. Some women do feel guilty afterward, many women don't. So yeah, it's not something where we can really hang our hat on as a reliable argument.
Yeah, but it has led to this whole shout your abortion thing because there's
Right.
this movement to prove that no, there's no shame in it, and take pride or whatever.
And since you
Yeah.
said this about women who have had abortions, from a more pastoral standpoint, I think it'd be awful for us to do this podcast and not have something to say to women who could be listening who have had an abortion, who are struggling with guilt right now because of it.
Did you want me to say it, or did you want to go ahead and? Because
I'd like to hear
you're
what you
probably
would
better
say.
at you're probably better at the pastoral stuff than I am. So, yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean, because for me, because I'm, I sometimes joke that I'm dead inside. It's not really true, but I have been. I have a lot of like emotional scars from when I was a kid, so I have a tendency to react philosophically to things, and I can tend to kind of let the emotional aspect of it go by the wayside. So I can say a few words about it, and then you can maybe speak to that, Nick, because I'm sure
Yeah.
you're probably better at the pastoral part of it
Yeah,
than
I'd
I
like to hear
am.
what you say
But
too.
yeah, so if there are women listening who've had an abortion and don't know, what there is you can do about it, or even if the emotions you're feeling are normal or not. Now, obviously, I'm not a woman. I've never had an abortion, so everything that I know about the feeling of abortion, I know from secondhand because I have a lot of pro-life friends. I have a lot of pro-life female friends. In fact, I have some very close female friends, that are very pro-life and religious, and others who have had abortions and have talked to me about it. So I don't know, So this is also why I tend not to talk about the emotional aspect, because that's one part that I really don't know from firsthand experience. I can talk about the fact that we're killing children, because we are, and because it's everyone's responsibility to speak up for those without a voice. And as I was incessantly bullied and tormented in school, that is a portion of the abortion issue that is personal to me, and that I was treated the same way that embryos and fetuses are treated in the womb. Because I spent most of my 20s believing myself to be subhuman and not a person, just based on the way that I was treated. And it was actually God and philosophy that kind of got me out of that way of viewing myself, which is kind of a discussion for another day. But I sometimes tell people that I could have written Boethius is the consolation of philosophy, because of how it helped me view myself as better than I would have if I were just reacting emotionally to things. But if there are women listening, it is a child that you're having removed, that you're having killed. And so obviously you can't just do something like that and expect to just get out of it scot clean and not have emotions following up, especially if you suspect that you haven't been given accurate information about what it is they're removing. So there are I'm not qualified because I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist, but there are post-abortion counseling organizations you can seek out. Organizations like Rachel's Vineyard it is a really well-known one. They do like post-abortion retreats, not just of post-abortive women, but of post-abortive men too, because men can also be affected negatively by an abortion, because that's their kid that's being killed too. It's not in his body, but it is his child that's being killed. So men can also have have post-abortion trauma as well. So Rachel's Vineyard is an organization that does retreats. I believe they do retreats for both men and women, where you can talk to counselors and you can do that kind of thing. And so the most that I can say, as someone who's not a licensed counselor, but as someone who does believe in God and the God of the Bible, who is also a God that offers forgiveness, is that there's only one unpardonable sin. That's blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. Abortion is not the unpardonable sin. If you've had an abortion, seek out pro-abortion counseling from licensed counselors, and just understand that that God does not hate you. That God's love is unconditional. He loves you regardless of what it is you've done, even though He wants us to live a certain way. And He does get disappointed if we do things that are wrong, but God is always there to offer forgiveness, no matter how many times we've fallen. He told his disciples, how many times are we to forgive? Not 7 times, but 70 times 7. He wouldn't expect something of His disciples that He wouldn't do Himself. So He's there offering forgiveness, no matter what it is you've done, no matter how many times it is you've messed up. So you can always come back to God, and He'll be ready to forgive you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that, Clinton.
Yeah. And
So you're
since
welcome.
Clinton wanted me to comment on this also, I'd say that this is speaking as a Christian, as a philosopher, historian, I think, speaking in much more pastoral capacity, that yes, we all agree what was done was wrong. And no one's debating that, especially the woman who's realizing this right now and coming to grips with it. But this doesn't have to become your identity either. This was something that was done wrong in the past. It can't be undone, but you don't have to carry it forever as well. You can receive forgiveness and grace. You can go on to be an example for other women, or if you're a man who allowed this to happen, be an example for other men in order to put a stop to this. You can spend your life trying to beat yourself up for the past, which won't do any good whatsoever. Or you can spend your life working to build up the future, not just for yourself, but for other women and men who could be about to make the same mistake. And yes, forgiveness is there, forgiveness is available. And if Christianity is true, which I hope it is, and the resurrection is true, you can very well see your child again. And if you do, your child will have no animosity, no hatred towards you whatsoever. There will only be love and forgiveness in a place where abortion will never be heard of ever again. So, if you've received God's forgiveness, forgive yourself as well. Get the counseling Clinton talked about, move on, and do what you can from this day forward.
This seems like a pretty good place to close out.
Yeah,
No, you
I think
didn't
so.
say anything, Joe.
What's that?
True. If you have something to add, feel free.
Yeah, do you have anything you'd say? Because we spoke up.
In terms of addressing a woman who has had this instance, the first thing I want to make clear is I don't think it would be fair at all to say that there is a woman out there who had an abortion who was like, this is a baby and I want to murder it. I'm certain that every woman, or most women at least, who've had an abortion have justified it to themselves in some way, so as to emerge from the situation without the impression that they just murdered a child. So it's whatever their hearts are telling them, whatever is going on in their conscience, at least some part of them is trying to justify it, because they know that were it a living child and they were ending that child's life, that would be a wrong thing to do. So, at some point, I assume that we as humans understand that murder is wrong. And so, in a sort of post facto realization that, hey, maybe I just did an act of murder, um, this was not going into a situation with the intent of murder. There was something else in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to paint women who have abortions as cartoon villains that are doing evil for the sake of evil. Um, this is something that they've justified to themselves, and it is something that they most likely will continue to justify, because who wants to deal with the dissonance of the idea that A, I'm a good person, and B, I committed murder? You can't hold those two in tension in your mind. You have to resolve that in some way, and this is dissonance.
Right.
Now, Christianity offers one escape from dissonance insofar as we recognize that, I don't know of a diplomatic way of putting this, so I'll just say none of us are good people. None of us have the capacity to always do the right thing at all times and under all circumstances.
Hashtag
This
triggered.
being the case, if there's a Christian out there that gives the impression that, hey, I'm a good person, I'm a perfect person, I'm better than you, that Christian has clearly misunderstood their own religious beliefs. The entire point of being a Christian is the recognition that I have done bad things and I will continue to do bad things because I'm incapable of complete self-control. And in the case of going into an abortion believing that you are simply removing a clump of cells or doing something to benefit yourself directly, there's this element of sort of, you don't always understand right from wrong. And none of us always have complete understanding of moral knowledge. I will say that in my work with abused children, the the thing that children most crave, as a general rule, is attention from adults. And when you're in a situation where you've been neglected for whatever reason as a child, you learn that the only way to get attention from adults is to misbehave and to irritate those adults to the point where they're giving you negative attention. They're yelling at you, possibly abusing you. But hey, at least they're looking at you. They're acknowledging that you exist. And so when you have children that come out of these situations, and then I am the one who's dealing with them, they continue to behave in this way. They want to get attention, and they get attention the only way they know how, by pushing buttons, by doing things to get under your skin, by being manipulative, by being irritating. And then when I have the urge to do something unfortunate to the child because of my irritation, I suddenly reel back in shock with the realization that, hey, there's very little that separates me from the person who abused this child, because when those thoughts enter my mind, how am I any better as a human being? My point in saying all of this is that we all have the capacity to do bad things, to make mistakes, to do evil. And the great thing about Christianity is that it offers forgiveness and it offers restoration to grace. You can, in fact, be a good person, but Christianity is the only avenue to do so. And it's not through your own efforts, it's through the forgiveness and grace offered by Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would be hypocritical to the extreme to condemn any woman who has had an abortion as being somehow less than we are. We're all guilty, and we're Christians because Christianity frees us from that guilt and restores us to grace. And so that would be my way of addressing it.
Yeah,
I like it.
that's well put. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for
Yeah.
coming
Well,
on.
I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, yeah, I think that about wraps up the conversation. So I was just going to pass it back over to you, Joel, since you usually close us out here.
Well,
Absolutely.
before we close out, I think I should state once again, but I do still affirm a virgin birth.
All right. That's
Okay.
very important. I appreciate
Yes.
it. Are we
Right.
bringing up the
Rick does
virgin
not
birth
slip back
because
into
of the subject
apostasy.
matter?
No, it's just good principle.
Right.
If you're a Christian, you should
Yeah.
always say that you affirm a virgin birth, which I do affirm.
I affirm the virgin
Yeah.
birth.
I affirm the virgin birth too.
All right, gentlemen, this has been an unusual episode of the Mentionables because other than you coming on, Clinton, and stating your position, or us airing debates that you've had, we as a team rarely talk about political issues. And it's unfortunate that abortion has been politicized because really it seems as if it should
Yeah.
be an ethical issue more than a political issue. Nevertheless, it's difficult to be a person who believes that murder is occurring and to sit on the sidelines and say nothing. But as I think we've demonstrated in our final exit there, the fact that we believe murder is occurring is not an act of standing and condemning that individual, because as Christians, we have no right to condemn. That right is up to God, not us.
Right.
But we have the right of extending the message of forgiveness. And so having that placed on the table, this is a social issue that's very present in everyone's mind, given the recent situation that's occurred. And it's very difficult to be a human and escape the news that this has occurred. And so we've presented an apologetics response to this and a perspective going forward of how this ought to be dealt with. And I hope that our listeners who are averse to political discussions, which I generally tend to be, will understand that position. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, it's yeah, I just wanted to just kind of throw in on that note that it's really unfortunate that it's become so politicized, because abortion, whether you fall on the right or on the left, Republican, Democrat, it's like just telling someone you're a Democrat or you lean right kind of tells people, okay, I believe no abortions are permissible, or I believe all abortions are permissible. People who kind of fall more moderately in the middle are kind of like shunned from their political groups. Like we talk about Tulsi Gabbard, who's a moderate on abortion. She believes in abortion, but not up to birth. So there's no real place for her in the Democrat Party, because the Democrats have actually said that no one who believes in abortion restrictions can would have their support, essentially. So it's really unfortunate that this has become so politicized, and it's really really hampered discussions and making any progress on this issue because of it.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Clinton. All right, so you've been listening to the Mentionables. We hope to start getting together and making episodes more frequently than we have been. And we pushed to make this episode because one of our listeners asked me why we weren't making episodes anymore. I hope we haven't lost all our listeners. At any rate,
we value all two of them. We really do.
Yeah, we do. So, keep up hope. We're going to continue to produce material, and we'll see you then. We've been the Mentionables.
That was fun.
Okay.